Good morning. Welcome to another session of #LDeduchat Leadership Development in Education Online. And we have an absolutely amazing lineup for you today. And the topic itself really cuts to the core of who we want to be within the education sector. We've got value-based learning, value-based education, value-based leadership is what we're going to be looking at today. And we've got Cori Bateman from Pioneer Trust, who will be leading the discussion with Professor Mick Waters and Dr. Neil Hawkes. I'm not going to do an intro for them. I don't feel worthy of doing an intro for them at this stage. I'm going to let them speak during the presentation and then Cori do a proper introduction later on. It's going to be a brilliant discussion and again, quite poignant at the time that we're at the moment when we're looking at school cultures and how we move forward. What value structures do we want to have in place for our students as they move from education within the schools to education in our societies? So that's what we've got coming up with you for you today. If you head on over to Twitter at Chiltern TSA, at Chiltern TSA, make sure you follow us and use the hashtag LDeduchat and just make sure that you can at least follow the conversation. But to be fair, we want you to join in with the conversation on there. Hit subscribe, click on the little bell sign, which is the notification. So every time we pop up a video for you, and at the moment that seems to be 5 times a week, you'll get notified of that. So without further ado, I'm going to now start our presentation.
Good morning, I'm Cori Bateman and I am the CEO of the Pioneer Learning Trust based here in Luton. Our trust has currently got 3 schools in it: Chantry Primary Academy, Southfield Primary School and Whitefield Primary Academy. All of our schools are based in disadvantaged areas here in Luton and we're all values-based schools. Now I'm here to talk to you this morning a little bit with Dr. Neil Hawkes and Professor Mick Waters. And Dr. Neil Hawkes is going to take us through some thoughts around values-based leadership. All of our schools in our trust are led by values-based leaders. So Neil is going to talk to us a little bit about what that looks like and what it feels like to be a values-based leader, and what that experience might be if you are working in a values-based school which is led in a values-based way. Neil is the founder of the values-based education movement in our schools and here in the UK, and has worked with schools around the world introducing values-based practice in their education settings. So it's a real privilege to have him here today. And later this morning, we'll be listening to Professor Mick Waters talking to us a little bit about some of the things that schools will be dealing with at this moment in time. With the coronavirus pandemic, we've all been challenged in schools to have to work in different ways, think in different ways, and organise the entire school workings. Everything about our educational setting is different as a result of the pandemic. And as we start to build up back to the new normal, whatever that might look like, we'll be doing things differently again. And so that adaptability, that flexibility, and that ever-changing experience that we have in schools at the moment, we'll explore that a little bit more with Professor Mick Waters in a little while. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Neil to talk to us a little bit about values-based leadership.
Hello, my name is Neil Hawkes. I just wish that I could see you today. I really enjoy giving talks and seminars when I'm really interacting with people one-to-one or in a group. I hope that the energy I feel and the enthusiasm I feel today will come across to you. I think it's a great privilege to talk with you today at this time of, well, during my career, I've never known a time, as I'm sure you haven't, of such unprecedented challenge. This morning, I was talking to a head teacher about the particular challenges he faces in a large school and how he's almost making things up as he goes along, relying on his incredible skills as a leader. And it is leadership that is the subject today, a subject that's really dear to my heart. During my career, I've had the privilege of leading in all sorts of ways as a class teacher and deputy head of school, head teacher, and various other positions that I've had. And leadership, I've just always been fascinated. How can I be a better leader? Very early on in my career, I learned the difference between management and leadership. Some of us are really good at management and not so good at leadership, and vice versa. And hopefully we can all gain skills in the dimension that perhaps we're not so good at. But you're all leaders today, so I'm very privileged to speak to you. This time we're in is a chance for us really to contribute to a new way of thinking about education and leadership and what we mean by schools. I think the challenges that many people have faced by not having a class normally, trying to work with families, having a group of children in the school from key workers, all these new challenges really have set my mind, and I'm sure your mind, onto the system that we've come from, that sort of normal. Is it the one that we want to return to? And I know that's almost becoming a hackneyed phrase now. But I do hope and pray that we don't just return to the previous situation. I've been banging on for many years that in this country, education is still based on an 18th, 19th century model of education, which I believe is not fit for purpose now. The problem with changing anything in education is that there's so much vested interest, and it seems to take ages to change things. But at the present time, things are changing really quickly. So perhaps we can jump on that particular bandwagon and start to work quite differently in our schools. My intention is to inspire you today to work with what I describe as explicit values-based education. I first worked with this at a school in Oxford called West Kidlington School, where for 7 years an incredible staff worked with me and the community just to see if by underpinning a school culture with universal positive human values, would that make a difference in terms of children's achievements, the quality of education going on, the inner stability of teaching staff and teaching assistants. What differences would it make? Because I noticed as a very young head teacher that children were coming to school increasingly without a compass for their life. They didn't have a vocabulary that would help them to make decisions and choices in their life. So for 7 years we experimented, and I'm delighted to tell you that the research showed that we were onto something. And that's why so many schools now, when they're thinking about their culture, really think about their values, but not in a superficial way. Every school says, yes, we've got our values. The real key is, do those values actually work out in practice when you watch people's behaviour? The routine structures, everything that the school is built on, does it reflect those values that I believe should be community inspired, so that everybody works to those values in the school community? Anyway, that's what I did, and that's what I am enthusiastically talking about always around the world. And I'm supported by wonderful head teachers and other leaders such as you. I've been a people watcher all my life. Mainly I watch myself. I'm just incredibly curious about still why I do the things I do. Do you ask yourselves those questions? Why do I do that? Why did I react to that person in that way? Could I have done it differently? These are all the sort of questions that I think a normal, curious person asks. And I always invite people to turn the volume, their own personal volume, a little higher. Just be a little bit more curious. Why do you get reactions like that from people? Why do some people stand away from you and not sort of engage with you? What is it about you that makes you a successful leader or not? Is it the fault of everybody else? Do we point the finger at others? Or can we learn from ourselves something called our own script? We all run a script through our lives and we repeat that script. But we can intervene. We can say, no, I can do it differently this time. I've worked with incredible leaders, and I've worked with some really interesting characters too. I worked with a head teacher a long time ago. He had the trait that on full moons he would disappear into his office and not be seen for the day. And staff would say, "Neil, what's wrong with X?" And I said, "Nothing's wrong, he'll be fine tomorrow." And sure enough, he was. So the effects of the moon perhaps affect you, or sometimes I think they affect me too. So different people behave in different way, and we should have compassion, I believe, for idiosyncrasy. I've had incredible, though being serious, examples, and right back in the early days of being a teacher on final teaching practice, I will never forget, and I'm in debt and gratitude to a character called Peter Long, who was the head teacher of Southstoke Primary School, a little village school in Oxfordshire. I learned a great deal from Peter, and I hope that during my career I've become almost as good. I don't know if I've been almost as good, but I've been trying to really, really emulate Peter's behaviour, which was consistent. He was just consistent. He didn't have his ups and downs. He wouldn't fly off the handle with children one moment and then be all over them, smothering them the next. He was consistent. Same with staff. You always knew when you saw him that you would get the authentic Peter, the real Peter. So you felt an incredible warmth. But he had boundaries. You knew his boundaries too, and you worked with them in them as a member of his staff. He had an inexhaustible personal battery. He didn't seem to get tired, no matter if you arrived at his office last thing on a Friday afternoon, he'd still be as though it was the start of the week. An incredible battery. But I learned later that he topped up his battery by really looking after himself in other ways, by looking after his health, exercise, taking time out with his own family. So charging his batteries. But at school, he seemed to have this inexhaustible personal battery. The other thing he had, which I've really worked hard to emulate, and that was an eternal optimism, especially in the face of complexity. You as leaders are faced with probably more complexity than any other leaders that education has seen, certainly during my lifetime. It's fraught, but you can choose. You can choose to say, "Oh, isn't it terrible? Why don't they do something about it?" Or you can take another tack by personally being optimistic. That's not being realistic, but it's always presenting things as a positive, so that even if there is a challenge, let's challenge this. I remember someone who worked with me a number of years ago, and when I first got the job, he came and he said to me, Neil, he said, "There's lots of problems here. I'm going to tell you all the problems." I said, and I won't name his name, but I said to him, "Let's look at the opportunities, not the problems. Let's be optimistic, and we'll find that some of those problems will melt away." He didn't believe me at first, but several years later he came and said, "Neil, I didn't believe you when you first said that, but it was quite true, because we made a culture built on positivity, not on gripes and moans." That's one of the keys of Peter. The other is something that I feel really passionately about now, and that is the ability to form connections with other people. Being able to connect, both with them as people and ideas. That's what the world's searching for now. Connecting with ourselves, other people, and our beautiful planet. We desperately need new systems which will sort of help us connect. So my mission at the moment is to forward that how to connect, both with ourselves, others. And I think that's really important. The behaviour of Peter reflected his values, of course, and his commitment. In the beginning, I think good leadership, your leadership, begins through you understanding yourself, your internal world. Chat to others, ask them, how do I come across? Do a 360, really get to understand and be prepared not to be defensive. The first inclination we have is to be defensive if we're criticised. Don't be open, be curious, learn from it. Of course, different personalities will see you differently, as you all are seeing me differently. We all see each other through our own personal lens of values and beliefs and our culture we've come from, our background, our education. So that's taken as read. So look at yourself. Be curious, sprinkled with a bit of compassion. Understand that you are a multidimensional personality, not just one, and always bring out your authentic self. Be authentic. Why am I so passionate about values? Some of you may be thinking, well, values are peripheral. They're not really important in the curriculum. I will really challenge you on that belief. In my experience, over 30 years and plus in education, I see that values are the bedrock on which we base everything we do. You can't get away from your own values. The moment you speak, you display your own values as I'm displaying mine. Those values create the thoughts and the behaviors that you follow in your life. Crucially in education, the children's values help them to form the choices they make. Their choices are based on those values that they have accumulated from you as educators or the home, their peer group or wherever. And those choices create their character. And that character forms their destiny. So if you ever wonder why you're in the position you are, it's all back to your values that you use in your life. That's why it's so utterly important. Remember that your role as a leader is to inspire a conversation between generations about matters of significance. That's what an educator does. Having that curiosity, openness, and deep love of learning. Release the creative dynamic in yourself and others. That's what I think the role of a leader is. It's not about you being the great I am. It's about your ability to release that creative dynamic and take the lid off the potential of both students and staff. Only promote a hierarchy of roles in school, never a hierarchy of relationships. Everybody should be absolutely equal. So finally, focusing on values gives your children, gives your students an ethical vocabulary, understanding words such as respect, love, tolerance, compassion, empathy, gives them a vocabulary which they can reflect on and use in their lives. That then gives them ethical intelligence, which I believe is the most important intelligence to develop in ourselves and in our students. Give everybody the competences of character, which we call superheroes. I've mentioned one, altruism. Another is wisdom. Another is communicative competence. Another is being trustworthy, self-led, educated, at ease with complexity. All these are the sum total of working with simple values, and they make composite values, which leads to us having these as parts of our character. Wouldn't the world be a wonderful place if people walked around really modeling wisdom, respect, authenticity? We would have a changed world, and that's the world that I want to see. We will then create a new narrative, which hopefully leaders, political leaders, will use. So we don't have ego-driven leaders, but values-driven leaders in the sense that I mean it, so that humanity can flourish. That's what I want humanity to do. I hope that you will enjoy being a leader as much as I enjoy being a leader. It is a great privilege and a great honor to lead others. Thank you very much for listening to me. Do contact me if you need to talk to me. My email is dr.neilhawkes, all one word, NEILHAWKES, @hotmail.com. I'd be delighted to hear from you. Bye-bye.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here this morning with Professor Mick Waters. And Mick, it's an absolute privilege to have you here this morning, so thank you for coming. Now, we've just been listening to Dr. Neil Hawkes talking about values-led schools, values leaders, values-based leaders, and how those values-based leaders are using those values to drive their organisations forward in school life generally. Now, today, with yourself, I'd just like to explore the curriculum a little bit. So how are our values-led leaders in our values-based schools taking forward their curriculum at this particularly challenging time? So if you'll indulge me, I've got a few questions that I'd like to ask. First of all, where do you think teachers and schools should start in curriculum terms as we see the system start to build back up to capacity?
Cori, I think the place to start is the place we would always start. We need to be sure what we think the curriculum is. I've always thought the curriculum is the entire planned learning experience we offer our children. It is the lessons, but it's also the events, the routines, what children do after and beyond school, and how they come together to create the diet from which we get the most learning for our young. And of course, at the moment, that diet's a little bit distorted, and how we make it work is the challenge schools are facing. And if we want to make it work, we also have to have a very clear image of what learning is. And for some people, learning is that sort of incremental pathway, a ladder that you go along and you go up various steps, levels, and sometimes we slip back and sometimes we make headway and sometimes we fall off. I personally think that learning is a little bit like that at times, but often it's better described as a map of markers of learning that you want children to visit, very much like orienteering works. And, you know, children set out to learn and we try to help them. And sometimes learning's uphill, hard work through the brambles, you get stuck in mud. But when you reach a marker, you're delighted, elated, and while you're there, you can get several of the other markers and sort of collect a few and make best use of the energy you put in. And at other times, learning's downhill with the wind and everything feels in your favour and learning seems to have no bounds. And I think we've got to get past this notion that you put the energy in, you get to the next learning marker, and then you move on to the next one. Learning's much more flexible than that, much more unpredictable than that. I rather like the drawings of Escher with those lovely sort of optical illusions where people seem to go down ladders, along floors, up ladders and come out somewhere that you would never have expected, or where water seems to flow in the wrong direction. I think learning is far more unpredictable than we sometimes make it. And we need to start from there in planning experiences for our children when they return to the full sort of experience of school.
Schools are concerned about helping children to catch up with lost learning. Where do you think they should start?
I think, again, the first thing to decide is, well, so what have they lost while they've been away? Where's the learning loss at the moment? And of course, the one that people are focusing on is the missed content, the notion that on that ladder, some children are a lot of steps below where they should have reached. Obviously, there are gaps between what we had planned and what children have learned because they haven't been with us. But perhaps just as important is that loss which is to do with reduced learner autonomy and influence, that our children haven't been in school and they haven't been doing those things that come through the context of the learning they do. So that sort of developing of learning attitudes, that understanding of collaboration, that notion of concentrating, being creative, building confidence, they're all natural, but actually they get extended and refined while children are in school. And of course, the third area of loss is that children have had a different social emotional experience these last few weeks from normal and a different physical experience, so that the behaviours that support learning may not be as extended as they typically would in our school setting. We know, don't we, that some children struggle to readapt to schooling after 1 week of half term. So goodness knows how they'll feel after 10, 12 weeks of absence from our schools or more. And of course, those losses are felt differently by different children. It's not the same for everybody. So some of our children, the lucky ones, have had several weeks at home which have actually been rather good. So they've had two parents at home. They've had the structure to the day. The parents have probably been seen reading and reading to them. They've probably done some sort of structured learning, but they've also perhaps had extended conversations, been outdoors in the garden, having talks about plants and butterflies and bees and looking at the clouds and talking about the sky and the summer and the spring in a way that for some children has been absolutely delightful. For others, at the other end of the extreme, it's been a different experience. That paucity of stimulus, the confined space, parents who don't know how to organise time and structure experiences for their own children. For some children, the sense of tension in society and families, the sadness, directly or indirectly, will have come through. Our children have been closer to death in a way not experienced in generations, and most children are resilient. They bounce back. They are just children, really. But the drama, the unease, the ceaseless talk of numbers, the tension and the sadness must have had an impact on our children. So when we're looking at learning loss, we've really got to think about the content, but also about those areas of social, emotional and physical development and the influence on learner autonomy and influence as we take them forward across our beautiful curriculum map.
So you mentioned 3 elements of loss there. How would we address those 3 elements of loss in schools?
The content one is almost the easiest, isn't it? We can look at our charts and we can see that they've missed this or they've missed that, and we can seek to fill the content. But I do worry about this notion of catch up, that people are worried that children have got to catch up. And I'm a little bit worried about the possibility that our children are going to come back, having lost those things that I was talking about, into a cauldron of activity where we're super boosting. So if we can light a fuse behind them, they'll fire off into a new learning universe. When actually we might be thinking, like the sports stars are, that we've got to get back up to match fitness. How do we gradually build up so that we're extending our learning muscles to the point where they can really go forward at sort of full throttle? The danger of children being jerked harder, faster and stronger into something they've missed, it sort of defies our image of what learning is. And that risk of lost learner autonomy and influence, I think, is one that schools can really start to build on again. But obviously they're going to have challenges because they're in a different physical setting in the classroom, and children are not able to be the children that they've been in the rest of their childhood. So those areas of attitude, collaboration, building confidence are part of the remit of the curriculum as we go forward. And that's where the values issue comes through. How do we bring our images of childhood, our images of learning, our images of relationships, our images of effort to bear in a way that helps children and is really, really positive, as opposed to some of the other possibilities that might occur if we don't.
You talked about a lot of elements of learning and learners there that aren't content related. So are you saying that content is unimportant at the moment?
No, I'm not saying that. Content is always important. We know, don't we, that knowledge is vital, that skills are essential, and that understandings are probably the thing that matter most. What I'm saying is teachers need to really think through, if children have missed aspects of work, is it essential to cover the aspects, or is it the big ideas we need to get through? So if they've missed Greeks or Romans or Egyptians, as probably they have, something like that in a theme, does getting through the theme matter, or is it getting to the big ideas that matters? And, we've only got perhaps 1/3 or 1/2 classes in at the moment. Is there a way that some children could study parts of Romans and other children study other parts, and we bring it forward to say, all that learning that each group is doing, let's tell you about each other's over the time you're in, so that we gradually understand what the Roman civilization was like, or the Greeks, Egyptians, Romans, Mayans. The civilizations had the same sorts of outlooks, didn't they? They all had a structure. They all had people who told people what to do and people who did what they were told, sometimes willingly, sometimes not. They all built systems for trade, for education, for homes and housing, for recreational leisure. They all tried to extend or build their empire. They all had enemies. And in the end, they all seemed to reach a point where they couldn't sustain themselves anymore. So that's what civilizations have done. Now let's look at some of the others, like civilizations in Asia or civilizations in different parts of the globe. So it's not that we forget the content, we try to work out how to get that content covered in a more swift way, perhaps, or a way that tries to bring out the big ideas better. But actually beyond that, we need to get in the notion of children taking responsibility, children being socially and emotionally supported, so that learning needs to be open-ended, fascinating, wondrous, intriguing. How do we help learning to be joyous? Well, look what I've found, look what I've enjoyed, rather than sit in your place, in your classroom, receive this, do something about it, and then go home again. So how do we get children to learn what we want them to learn, but in the way that we want them to learn it, so they're sustained and move forward as learners over time? I've always thought that all this emphasis on practice and improve and test and feedback is fine, but some things are really hard to practice and improve. How do you improve the appreciation of a poem or a song, or how do you improve the understanding of argument or proposition or propaganda? How do you recognise propaganda and improve it and practice it? How do we get our children to be practicing enjoying beauty, or spotting injustice, or holding faith, or daring to dream? These sort of lovely terms. And most schools seem to have a mission statement or a strapline that talks about children being helped to be the sort of human being that they would want to be and that society wants them to be. We want them to be inquisitive, kind, generous, thoughtful, helpful, happy people. Now, if we mean that, the way we visit the content can help that to happen and become a vehicle for helping, as opposed to the end in itself.
There's always this pressure of accountability, SAT, and the need to ensure coverage of the national curriculum.
There is. The accountability, I think, comes back to what did we want our children in our school to learn, and did we help them to achieve it? Are we accountable professionally? That's values. And then inside that, you can think about the national curriculum, that riveting document. I mean, it's 200 pages long, and there are 28 of those pages devoted to anything other than English, maths, and science. So in those 28 pages, we cover all the foundation subjects. And that seems to me to give you the scope to do incredible things, because I mean, if you read art, it basically says, do it drawing and painting and know something about an artist. I mean, it gives you absolutely endless scope. So that 28 pages can help you to get into the beauty of poetry, the gentleness of art, the science of wonder. I mean, if children these last few weeks had been asked to go outside or look out of a window, find the moon in the sky, draw its position relative to something that's stuck, like a lamppost or a block of flats, draw its position and draw its shape every night at the same time, they would have learned far more about the planetary system and the universe in terms of how it shifts around than they will by drawing 4 little pictures on a printed sheet about the phases of the moon. So how we teach the curriculum and make it matter really comes alive. So what about teaching the soothing nature of music? Or you can do historical things. I mean, the number of people now, especially men with great long hair after this because they didn't panic buy haircuts beforehand, we could do about Georgian men wearing wigs and why they stopped, and the wigs during the French Revolution and why they were banned afterwards. So really sort of trying to bring the curriculum into something that's a rich experience for children. And we've only got, half of them there to really enjoy it with. So why don't we really enjoy it?
How will the return to schools influence teaching and learning in terms of pedagogy?
I don't think we can underestimate the way in which pedagogy will have to change in the different environment. I mean, children are going to be seated at a 2-metre separation in a potential circle of 12 square metres, which is massive. I mean, if you buy a wall, it's 6 square metres. If you're in a corner, it's 3 square metres. But what that means is they're having a version of distance learning. They're over there. And that's so different from many classrooms as we've known them. And what it means potentially is they're going to be exposed. They're exposed personally in that social emotional aspect of learning. So teachers will need to develop different types of classroom discussion, different sorts of question and answer, feedback, which apparently is so vital to learning, The feedback is going to be so different. If you're in a 12 square metre circle and somebody from afar speaks and gives you feedback and it's embarrassing, that will have a massive impact on children in all sorts of ways. So somehow we've got to match the pedagogy and the curriculum. It's a great potential for teaching the maths of social distancing that, 2 metres means a circle of 12 square metres. If you're in space, then that gives you a cubic meterage of 32 cubic metres for your sphere around you. I mean, the maths is just there to be enjoyed, but pedagogy is going to change.
What else is going to change? What about Ofsted? Do you think they need to work differently?
I always think Ofsted needs to change. Oh, poor Ofsted. They try so hard. I'm sure they try. The problem is they as ever, they develop a new framework for the very best of purposes and reasons. Problem they get is that their implementation never quite matches the intention, because they're always searching for this sort of unattainable consistency. And then the impact is not what they wanted in their intention, so they go back to a new framework to try and get a new one. I just hope that we start to realise that we need to think differently about the way inspection works. I mean, it is interesting. In the last little while, our schools have been thanked for the efforts they've made. They've stepped up when they've been needed in all sorts of ways. They've been hailed by politicians as heroic. And I think it will be very hard to say for some time that schools are not doing a good job. And therefore, the way forward for inspectors is to join alongside the teaching profession and try and help people to understand where good practice is really growing and be part of a different world rather than go around writing reports on it. I mean, for goodness sake, I think we could say keep your distance, and I don't typically mean 2 metres. Just let's see it in a different light.
Finally, what might some of the better things to emerge from recent months be?
Well, I think the better things. Well, I don't know if you can see behind me, there's a picture on the wall which I really like. It's by Peter Blake. It's of children's playground games since schools began 150 years ago. And I bought it in Wakefield, where they're selling pictures by famous artists to keep going their loan system for pieces of art to go into school. And Peter's picture there, it's got children playing with every game you can imagine. I spent ages looking at it. So that there are games with equipment like Meccano and bikes and things. But most of the games are invented by children, usually with very little resource. So with a bit of wood or themselves, the leapfrog, the hopscotch, the chasing games and so on. I think maybe we'll realise that a lot of the learning that children do has to come out of their own self, that they're ingenious people, they're creative people, they're imaginative people, they're self-organising people. They can do it. I'm not saying playgrounds should be as they used to be, but I am saying we mustn't spoon feed our children to the point where they can only do what they're told or asked to do. We've got to put some volition into them by the way we work, and it will be a challenge the next little while, but I hope that will come through. And then secondly, I don't know, I was just thinking, when I was in reception, which is a very long while ago, we did a project on people who help us, and we had a book that said people who help us. When you opened it, it had doctors and nurses, naturally, and then there were teachers and religious leaders. And then there were people in uniforms like police officers and firefighters, and a section on farmers and power station workers. I don't think it said much about the sort of bin collectors or lorry drivers, but the essence was that there's a big group of people who help in all sorts of ways. And I hope through this recent crisis, society has realised that actually lots and lots of people play very, very important parts in the way society functions and develops. And maybe we'll start to value each other a little bit more, and we'll stop that thing about public and private sector and there's one burden on the other and does one demand too much of the other. And maybe society will take each other a little less for granted and care a little bit more about each other as we go forward. I hope so. And the group that we need to care about most are our younger generation, and give them the sort of future that we would always wish for them, but is going to be that little bit more challenging given what we've just gone through. Our children matter so much.
Absolutely, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think that our schools with their values and their values-based cultures and ethos is going to be such a huge important part of that. And schools have been back now for a couple of days, and just being in school and around the children, I've heard laughter and seen children smiling. I've seen teachers just relaxing and sitting in the sunshine with the children while they're playing, and as you say, inventing games. Children have got that huge capacity for invention. You give them a football and say to them, right, well, you need to invent a game that you can play with 2 meters distance apart. Lo and behold, that's exactly what they've done. And so, yeah, children are so resilient and so remarkable, and we need to put some trust in them and develop them and that independence that they have got. You're right, we need to stop spoon feeding them. I just think it's so powerful what you've said this morning, everything you've said this morning. So thank you so much for your time. I do hope that we meet again very soon and we can talk more about the curriculum and about teaching and learning. Thank you, Mick.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Cori. Thanks, everybody.
Welcome back. I could listen all day around this topic. We're going to jump into some Q&As, but first of all, what I'd like to do is just remind you that on Twitter we have at Chiltern TSA. I've just had a look. There's well over 300 tweets during that session there, and lots of takeaways, lots of statements, lots of points to ponder from that session, and the questions that are coming through are great. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the E-Stage Cori Bateman, CEO for Pioneer Trust, Dr. Neil Hawkes, and Professor Mick Waters. Welcome, and thank you so much for that input this morning at the situations that we're facing at the moment. It couldn't have come at a better time.
Thank you, Arv. I just wanted to just kind of round some of that up a bit. I was talking to a colleague in school the other day, and her husband works in the NHS, and she said that in the NHS they're working on the 3 A's. They're thinking about the things that from this time they're going to adopt, new things that they've started to do as a result of the pandemic. So they're adopting new practices they had in place which they've adapted. So they've got things that they're going to adapt for the future, and then things they're just going to abandon. And I thought, do you know what? That's exactly really what we need to be doing in schools, and what we need to be thinking about is we can learn from this and we can gain from this. And I was saying to a colleague on LinkedIn yesterday that I've become almost obsessed about where we can find the silver linings and how things can improve in schools as a consequence of this really challenging and difficult time. So I'd be really interested in hearing from other professionals and other school settings about the things that they might adopt, adapt or abandon as they move forward and we return to whatever the new normal looks like. And I was also reflecting this morning that there are a couple of key values that I think schools will need to work very hard with their children and with their, as a professional community, being trust, having some trust in the system and trust in the professionals, trust in the children. We've seen some amazing work, for example, coming in from children working remotely, and it's fascinating how much, in terms of the quantity and the quality of, for example, some pieces of writing that have come in from children at home, without having had a sort of 20-minute teacher input, that the necessity for the amount of teacher talk that's going on in the classroom doesn't appear for all children to be a need. So I think there's something for us to learn from that. So having some more trust in the children, that actually they know more than we think they do, and maybe we need to sort of hand a bit more of that over. Trust in our professionals. We've had teachers working remotely, TAs working remotely, so many people, professionals working remotely, and how much trust have we given to our professionals over this time? It's huge, and I think that that's something we absolutely have to hold on to. And we haven't been doing remote lesson observations of what's been going on with the children at home, and yes, we've been monitoring it and making sure that the quality is there, but that trust has been placed in the professionalism of teachers, and I think we need to gain from that and maintain that, and have some faith that children can recover, that the curriculum can recover, and that our teachers, our professionals, will get the children back to where they need to be. If I think back to 2016 and the Key Stage 2 SATs, and the disastrous national results, 53% of children aged 11 managed to reach these new expectations that the government put in place, and now we're up to 65%. So, you know, over time we can get the children back to where they need to be. We have to have faith and hold on to not rushing them, and what Mick was saying about being patient. Patience is our other sort of key value. Not super boosting the children. We can't stuff in the learning that they've missed over this period of time, and I just think that that's a really important point that we've got to hang on to. So just some key themes there to build on, and I think we had some fantastic questions come in, so I wonder, Alv, if it's all right with you if I can move on to some of the questions. I know
Absolutely, go for it. Yeah.
Neil, you wanted to pick up on the question about thinking about how, so it was Alex's question about how people come across as leaders.
Yes, thank you, Alex, for your question. Before I answer that, I said something incorrectly just now, and that was my email address. And so I'd like to correct that. I did correct it on screen, but if anyone would like to contact me, it's small case dr.neilhawks, all one word, @gmail.com. I said something else earlier, I don't know why. So this question of leadership is so important, and Alex is talking about, you know, how you can listen to people without appearing weak as a leader. Well, it all depends what you mean by leadership and what that is. From my own experience, I had 18 years as a head teacher of 3 schools, and my style was actually investigated by a group of researchers from Oxford University to see, and it was compared with other styles of leadership. My own style was very much a listening mode, but I always thought a leader should always make decisions. So when everyone's been listened to, then as a leader, you need to take the institution forward based on deep listening. I think deep listening when we teach to children is really important, because most of the time people are listening. They are not listening. They're thinking about what they're going to say next. And deep listening is about really. And what I found at school is that colleagues really appreciated deep listening when you really did focus on what they say. We've got now leadership models that are in the world that are based on being an extrovert, being a narcissist, and all those external things. Now, values-based education, when I first started talking about it, was, as I said, a sort of experiment. But what's been pleasing me in recent years is my friends in interpersonal neurobiology, Dan Siegel, to mention but one, those colleagues who have been working with the brain have been telling me, Neil, what you were talking about 30 years ago, we can show is correct now. You need to look at a classroom as a group of people who are working like a tribe of people, really, and you've got to just inspire them and listen to them. And it's the same as a leader. A leader should really deeply listen and then be prepared to make sometimes difficult decisions, but it doesn't appear weak. I remember, again, as a head teacher, I always used to ask for feedback if I took an assembly or did a lesson, and staff would give me that. Now that shows confidence, not weakness. If you're a weak leader, you hide behind routines, you hide behind structures, you hide behind, well, it's what the government say I must do, it's what the local authority or our trust or whoever runs the show. You hide behind those structures instead of creating an atmosphere in which everybody can join in. So Alex, it's not a weakness. I think it's a tremendous strength. And colleagues really, really appreciate that when you really open yourself up to them. But you've got to be strong as that. Alex, do contact me by email and we can continue this conversation if you would like. Thank you, Cori.
Thanks, Neil. There was a question from Emma about the lost learning, the non-content driven, or the obviously I think teachers are busy trying to address content through their remote learning. But Mick, I wonder if I can ask you to come in on this question and thinking about how we can start to address that lost learning that isn't content driven whilst we're still in a remote teaching or the blended model of some remote and some in school. How can we start to deal with that?
Good morning, Emma. I'm sorry my picture's not there. I think we're having broadband issues, but we'll carry on anyway. I think it's a good question. If children are working remotely, how do we try to support the other aspects of learning beyond the content that they might be losing? And I think so much of it depends on the sorts of tasks that children are asked to do at home. I've been looking closely at things that schools are sending children or putting on the web from their school websites and asking children to have a go at. And there is a real difference. Some of the schools are asking for very perfunctory activity from children. It's basically do your maths and your English, fill in some printed sheets, online maybe, and make sure you're keeping up, going up those ladder, that ladder which has rungs of achievement sort of marked in it. And other schools are seeming to me to be inviting the family and the children to work together on things, to enjoy some little challenges, things that give the children an opportunity for creativity, thinking for themselves. I've seen some lovely activities where children are asked to make musical instruments out of junk, basically, stuff around the house where, you know, there are three sorts of instruments: wind instruments, instruments you strum and instruments you beat. Can you play certain tunes with your family to make that work? I've seen some lovely examples of children being asked to create the mathematics of me, where they're measuring, it seems, everything about themselves and creating a sort of picture of themselves and then other people in their household. I've seen children being asked to do the history of me, which is a lovely chance to sort of look at things they like and indeed the experiences they've had. And I think so much is the tone of what we offer children. Are we sending the next challenge in the sense of, here you are, turn this round and give it back to me? Or are we giving children chances to explore, think, work together with other people in their household and so on? So I'll not go on anymore, but I think it's about the tone as much as anything.
Thanks, Mick. Just adding to that, I would also advocate that teachers can be giving children things to do which build on their values and start to instill some values-based learning, so that, you know, things like stories, getting involved in some of the media campaigns. I mean, Major Tom is a colonel now, isn't he? So he, you know, that captured everybody's imagination, and the children get on board with some of the sort of the bigger campaigns. And at the moment, the Black Lives Matter is such a topical area, and I think that children can really start to explore some issues around belonging and identity and understanding one another in a way which, when in preparing them to come back and to reconnect with their peers in school, I think could be really valuable learning. I would be looking at things that promote connectedness and belonging with the school setting and the school, their peers and the culture of the school. And I think that's some of the way you can start to address some of those, the lost learning of the culture of the school. I also noted Fatima has raised the issue that social distancing might not be an issue by September. It may not be an issue by September in schools, but I think indications are that social distancing is going to be around in culture and in our communities for many months to come. They're talking about social distancing being in place up until Christmas, January potentially. So and even if there is no social distancing needed or expected in schools, we are still likely to be a long way off coming back in September, 30 children in a classroom and everybody getting on with life as normal. So there definitely will be that sense of building back up. I don't know if Mick or Neil want to jump in and add anything to that. No? Okay. There was one last question I just wanted, if we've got time, to pick up on, and that was around aligning values. So alignment is a massive issue with schools, and if you haven't got alignment in your school community, if the values that you have as a leader are not shared by your staff team, that can be an issue. And it may be that it's one member of staff, a group of staff. It may be that culturally that the school haven't entirely bought into it. And Neil, you've introduced values in so many schools now that you must have come across this area where a leader or leadership team have a key set of values they want to work with, and they've got struggles with some of the staff or the community within the school.
Yes, or it can be the other way around, Cori. I was phoned up a teacher yesterday who wants to introduce values into a really large school. And he said the head teacher is such a narcissist, it's not going to work. And I said, well, you know, the whole thing about values-based education is it's a whole school initiative. It's not a one person. He said, the teacher said that the school had values on the wall, but they were meaningless. And that's the danger. So the leader is important. Cori, I remember when you introduced values into your school, you didn't, as a bull at the gate, go and sort of steamroller. You went through a process of inclusion to make sure that the community understood what you wanted to happen in the school. So that process is so important to include, and to have, ideally, I always say now, to have a session with parents and the community. When you ask what dispositions do we want in our children now in the 21st century? And my experience around the world is the same dispositions come up. People want, and I noted you said trust, for instance. Without trust, no institution ever works properly. Look at the countries of the world that don't have trust, that are led by leaders that a significant proportion of people don't trust them. So trust is absolutely fundamental. So in an open session, you're looking at these values and exploring them and getting a buy-in. In Australia, when we were introducing values in Australia, the Australians put in a lot of money for community forums to enable that process. So as a leader, please don't write a list of values that you then send to people and say, these are our values. It is a process. And when people ask me often to come and give an introduction to values, I say, please can I talk to all the staff, teaching, non-teaching, everybody. These processes, Cori, are written down in a website. If anybody is interested, then it's called valuesbasededucation.com. There's masses of information for any individual or school that want to develop. And lastly, I'd say, if you're interested in just a short session that you can show to staff, then I did a TED talk a year or so back, and that might help in 15 minutes to persuade your doubters and your cynics that there's something in this. It is scientifically based. The detractors to values-based education will say it's all fluffy and airy-fairy, doesn't actually get to the nub of education. All the evidence is it actually does. It's the whole bedrock of education. Thanks, Cori.
Thank you. There were a couple of points that came in. One was from Julie Walker, who's just likened some of the comments you were making, Mick, around about the guidance from Kirsty Williams for Wales, the 4 purposes of the new curriculum being the basis for blended learning. I don't know how familiar you are with the Welsh curriculum and whether you've got any comments to make on that.
The Welsh government have been really interesting. Kirsty Williams, the minister, has been in touch with schools to say, as they begin taking children by a part-time basis, the top thing that they should be thinking about is children's well-being, being of children and well-being of staff in front of all the other content issues. In fact, they've suspended and disapplied the national curriculum until further notice and asked teachers to basically teach children the things that they need to be enjoying learning and coming to terms with. So I'm pretty impressed with what Wales does. It's really on top of it. There's another point about Scotland, which has been for some time seeing their inspectorate in a challenging but supportive role, and a supportive but challenging role, and working in a different relationship with schools. And I think there's a model there that people elsewhere are looking at intently to think about using. So I think there's some interesting comments coming in from people in the audience. Thanks very much.
Clearly the English government not listening with their, summer school to super boost the children, and the national curriculum applies, and SATs will be happening next year according to what's being said at the moment. So it's a shame we're not listening a bit more to what's happening in Scotland and Wales, but we have to deal with the cards that we've been dealt, I suppose.
Just to follow up what Cori was saying, just before the lockdown, I was in New Zealand, and I was so impressed with the degree of trust between schools and the Prime Minister of New Zealand, because she's upfront, she's open, she's honest, she's direct. All the negative things I said about leadership, she's the opposite in my view. My daughter, who works as a secondary school teacher, English teacher, you know, just sings the praises of that government. So it can be done. There are a group of women leaders who are getting together, Iceland, Scotland, New Zealand, and they're looking for a new way of thinking about economy that's based on well-being, not on money. And I think that ties in with all the values things we talk about. Things have to shift from a materialistic society that's based on a few people having a lot to us all sharing more equity. And that's why values are so important, because you look at justice and what justice means and equity. So New Zealand's a good role model at the moment. I'm biased because my daughter's there.
I'm going to let you have that final word then. Neil, thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you, Mick.
So first of all, I want to thank you, Cori, for pulling this together. Again, thank you so much and appreciate it. And I know that just by looking at the comments that the attendees today, and I know that on the YouTube, this will be shared many, many times. So thank you for pulling this together, first of all, Cori. And thank you for giving your time to this, Neil and Mick. Absolutely honoured to have you as part of the sessions that we're running. And I think the attendees, as I said, have hung on every word that's come out today. So thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
So, no, thank you. That's the end of another session, but I will give my thoughts on this. I've written down a few things that have hit a chord with me. So from Neil, I had values are the bedrock of everything that we do, and education needs to be wondrous, intriguing. That sums up, I think, or embodies how we should treat education. And then from Mick, you know, how do we get our students to spot injustice? How do we get them to see the beauty in art? Again, it's just the things that we need to sort of like think about when we're putting our curriculums together, but also when we're standing there in front of our students. And then finally, I love your 3 A's, Cori: adopt, adapt, and I particularly like the last one, which is to abandon. Is what things do we now find within our systems, our cultures, that add to our values that we don't need? How do we move forward and look for those silver linings and hold on to those as we move forward into the tricky times ahead? Whichever way we look at it, whatever happens, they're going to be tricky, they're going to be challenging. But I know that as educators that we will always place our students at the center of everything that we do, and we just need to make sure that we focus on the things that matter. So that's the session for me. I've been absolutely inspired again. I'm in a privileged position where I get to speak to so many different people, and today no exception, where so many people have contributed to the sessions that we run. Continue the conversation on our Twitter, Chiltern TSA. Make sure you follow us on there and engage in the conversation. This is about us talking to each other. This is the only way that we can do it, whether it's through YouTube, whether it's webinars, whether it's through online conversations. We need to keep those conversations together. When we finally get back to whatever our new normal is that we haven't lost our connection, and we've definitely built on our values that we want to carry forward. So this is me, Arv Cowshaw, signing off for another session of #LDeduchat Leadership Development in Education Online, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you so much.